The night was unusually cold for early spring when the first girl went missing. At first, no one noticed. In a rural stretch of the United States, miles away from the nearest town and surrounded by forests so thick they swallowed sound, disappearances could remain invisible for days. But when the count reached 30, the entire region was forced to confront a terrifying truth. Something was happening inside the gates of the old, isolated dog breeding farm off Redwood Highway. The farm had always carried a strange reputation. Locals referred to it as the Hollow Kennels, a place with high fences, barbed wire, and warning signs that seemed excessive for a facility said to breed rare guard dogs. The owner, a reclusive man named Elias Crowell, rarely showed his face in public. Rumors about him drifted around town like smoke. Some said he imported aggressive canine hybrids from overseas. Others claimed he ran illegal experiments on animals. Nobody had ever proven anything, and the sheriff's office never bothered to investigate. After all, the farm was isolated, taxes were paid, and trouble had never leaked out. Until now. The first official report came from a college in the next county. A 19-year-old student named Tessa Morgan had vanished after accepting a weekend job at the farm. She had told her roommate she was hired to help photograph new litters for the farm's website. She never came back. When two more local girls disappeared the same week, all last seen heading toward the same remote road, the sheriff's office finally took notice. But the case took a darker turn when families from neighboring states began reporting missing daughters, all of whom had been contacted online by a job recruiter linked to the farm. Federal authorities were called in, but the farm was enormous, nearly 300 acres, and its internal layout was a maze of locked barns, underground sheds, and sprawling kennels. Every building was secured with reinforced doors and heavy chains. The sound of dogs barking echoed across the valley day and night. Some residents said the barking didn't sound normal, too aggressive, too deep, almost unnatural. The investigators secured a search warrant, but the farm's owner was nowhere to be found. His truck, however, was discovered near one of the back barns, abandoned, door wide open, keys still in the ignition, as if he had run off in a hurry. When officers entered the first barn, they were hit by a powerful chemical smell. Rows of cages lined the walls, and inside them were dog breeds no one could easily identify. They were larger than normal shepherds, leaner than wolves, and their glowing yellow eyes followed every movement. The animals pressed against the cage doors, growling with a hunger that made even trained officers step back. But the most disturbing discovery came when investigators reached a cold storage area at the rear of the barn. A metal door, sealed with heavy bolts, trembled slightly, as if something was moving on the other side. It took nearly 10 minutes to get it open. Inside was a narrow hallway leading to a set of underground rooms. The air was cold enough to sting the throat. The first room contained medical tables, surgical tools, and computers loaded with encrypted files. The walls were lined with charts detailing genetic diagrams, most of them showing hybrid DNA sequences involving dogs and humans. Officers exchanged horrified glances. Whatever was happening here was far worse than illegal breeding. In the next room, they found a row of steel holding cells. Torn clothing lay scattered on the floor. Scratches, human fingernail marks, covered the walls. Long hair strands clung to the corners. It was clear the missing girls had been here. But they were not here now. A sudden metallic scream, the sound of bending steel, echoed from deeper inside the underground corridor. Officers moved cautiously, weapons drawn, flashlights trembling in their hands. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a growl that chilled everyone to the bone. When they opened the final chamber, the truth exploded into reality. The girls were there, but they were not the same. 30 young women, pale, wounded, and terrified, huddled at the far end of the room. But between the officers and the girls stood creatures unlike anything seen before. Something had been done to them, something irreversible. Their limbs were longer, their eyes reflective like predators, and their movements fast and unnatural. They let out guttural, animalistic noises, crouching low, as if ready to defend the girls or attack the intruders. One officer whispered, My God, what did he turn them into? Before anyone could respond, a shrill alarm blared. Hidden cages snapped open. The hybrid dogs from the barns above stormed down the corridor, teeth bared, eyes glowing. Chaos erupted. Officers fired warning shots, but the creatures didn't retreat, they charged. In the frenzy, one of the altar girls rushed toward the agents, not to attack, but to point desperately toward a vent shaft on the far wall. Her voice cracked as she forced out a single word: escape. Only a handful of officers managed to get the real girls out through the shaft, dragging them up into the woods behind the farm. Helicopters arrived minutes later, sweeping the area with floodlights. The farm's underground tunnels collapsed shortly after, whether due to an explosion triggered by the owner or structural weakness, nobody could say. Elias Crowell was never found. The rescued girls were taken to a secure medical facility. Doctors said their bodies showed signs of experimental injections, genetic tampering, and prolonged psychological trauma. They spoke of cages, injections, loud machines, and creatures that sounded inhuman. Some insisted Crowell wanted to create a new species, part human, part canine, for reasons none of them understood. Federal agencies sealed the entire valley, but locals claim strange howls still echo at night from deep within the forest. Some believe the hybrid girls and creatures that escaped the collapse might still be out there, hiding in the wilderness. Others whisper that the experiments were never truly destroyed, that someone, somewhere, continued Crowell's work. But one thing is certain. The rural United States would never forget the horrifying discovery at the isolated dog breeding farm in 2025 and the nightmare of 30 young women who vanished into the dark, only to return changed forever. The days following the rescue were drenched in unease. News helicopters circled the region non-stop, broadcasting images of the destroyed farm, the collapsed tunnels, and federal agents swarming the valley like ants over a carcass. Reporters called it the most disturbing rural crime case in modern U.S. history, but even they didn't know the half of it. What the public didn't see, what only a handful of officials understood, was that the nightmare wasn't over. It had evolved, slipped through their fingers, and now breathed somewhere in the dark forests where human laws held no power. At St. Aurelia Medical Center, the rescued girls lay in private rooms heavily guarded by federal marshals. Doctors worked day and night, trying to reverse the physical damage done to them. Some had visible scars from injections. Others had heightened senses, hearing stronger than normal, pupils that contracted unnaturally fast under light, or reflexes too sharp to be considered human. The medical team could not explain any of it, at least not publicly. They weren't allowed. One of the girls, Tessa Morgan, the first to disappear, remained mostly silent. She rarely ate, rarely slept, and often stared at her reflection in the window as if unsure whether the girl looking back was really her. During one late-night psychological evaluation, she finally spoke. "He didn't just experiment on dogs," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He experimented on us because he wanted to see if we could survive like them, hunt like them, obey like them." "What do you mean, obey?" the psychologist asked. She hesitated, her eyes clouding. "He wanted to create a pack." In Washington, a classified meeting was held at the highest level. Experts from the FBI, National Genetics Bureau, and Homeland Security sat in a tense conference room reviewing images recovered from Crowell's encrypted drives. They saw diagrams of DNA splicing, hybrid embryo models, and disturbing notes about receptive subjects. One note, in Crowell's unmistakably careful handwriting, read, "Human loyalty is fragile. Canine loyalty is absolute. If I merge them correctly, the result will be unstoppable." Another file contained videos. The men and women in the conference room had to turn away. The director of the task force made one thing clear. If any of his creations survived the collapse, we are not dealing with runaway victims. We are dealing with a new predatory species. In the rural county where it all began, locals had already sensed something was wrong. 2 hunters reported seeing figures moving far too quickly through the trees after sundown. A farmer claimed his cattle were attacked by something that left bite marks too large for wolves. Another resident swore he heard screaming, followed by animal howls, echoing from the valley behind the destroyed farm. The sheriff tried to downplay the rumors, but fear had planted its roots deep. Meanwhile, the investigation team returned to the ruins of the dog-breeding farm. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar, heat sensors, and canine units. The forest felt unnaturally quiet, as if the birds and animals refused to go near what remained of the underground chambers. Smoke still drifted from the collapsed tunnels, though no fire had been present for days. The lead federal agent, Claire Whitford, ordered a deeper scan. Radar revealed something none of them expected, a secondary tunnel system running beneath the forest, untouched by the collapse. A hidden extension. Crowell didn't just work under the barn, she murmured. He was building something bigger. The team moved in cautiously. They found a concealed metal hatch buried beneath layers of branches and dirt. It opened into yet another network of rooms, more surgical tables, more genetic storage tanks, more cages. Some cages were empty. Some had been forced open from the inside. On one wall, scrawled in black paint, was a message. "The pack will live on." Before they could process it, a distant howl rose through the tunnel, deep, angry, and undeniably human at the edges. The team froze. Their flashlights flickered. "Everyone out," Claire shouted.
"Now!"
But it was too late. 4 figures emerged from the shadows, moving on all fours with terrifying speed before straightening into crouched, half-human stances. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beams like predators. Their limbs were thin but powerful, muscles tensing under unnatural skin. Their teeth were longer, sharper. And their faces still had traces of the girls who had gone missing. Shots were fired. The hybrid scattered in a blur of impossible movement. One leapt onto an agent, knocking him down with ease. Another smashed a light, plunging part of the tunnel into darkness. The creatures did not try to kill. They tried to protect something deeper inside. Claire realized it in a heartbeat. "They're guarding a nest," she whispered. Using thermal scanners, they detected a warm chamber beyond a sealed door. When they forced it open, they found something horrifying. Incubation pods, about a dozen of them, filled with fluid and partially formed hybrid fetuses. Crowell hadn't just experimented on the girls. He attempted to breed an entirely new generation. The hybrid shrieked and retreated toward the tunnels, but something else stirred behind them. Heavy footsteps approached. A tall figure with skin marked by surgical scars stepped into the red glow of an emergency light. His face was gaunt, unrecognizable, but his eyes were unmistakably human. It was Elias Crowell, or what was left of him. Half of his body appeared to be fused with some form of canine enhancement. Metal implants lined his arms. His posture was hunched, his breathing ragged. He had experimented on himself. "You should not have come here," he hissed, voice distorted by something unnatural inside his throat. Claire raised her weapon. "What did you do to these girls?" His lips peeled back into something between a smile and a snarl. "I set them free. I gave them strength. I made them more than human, more than helpless prey. You destroyed them. I perfected them." He turned toward his creations, muttering something like commands. The hybrids responded instantly. Crowell's pack charged. The team opened fire, retreating toward the exit, but the tunnels erupted with chaos. Creatures moved across walls and ceilings, shrieking. One agent was dragged away, his screams muffled by darkness. Another hybrid tackled Claire, knocking her weapon loose. She fought back desperately, grabbing a broken metal pipe and striking the creature across the jaw. It stumbled, giving her a moment to run. Behind her, the tunnel shook violently as a blast detonated. Crowell had triggered a collapse, sealing off the nest, and burying his creations with him. Claire barely escaped through the hatch before the ground caved in, swallowing the hidden lab forever. But even as the earth settled, she heard something, muffled howling from beneath the soil. Back in Washington, the government officially closed the case, declaring the hybrid creatures and Crowell dead in the collapse. The public version of the report removed all details of genetic manipulation, referring instead to extreme animal abuse, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. But Claire knew the truth. She had seen two of the hybrids escape into the forest before the tunnels collapsed. She had footage of their speed, faster than any known animal. She remembered their eyes, filled with both pain and loyalty. Not loyalty to Crowell, loyalty to each other. At the medical center, Tessa Morgan woke up screaming on the third night after the collapse. When nurses rushed in, she pointed toward the window with shaking hands. "They're calling us," she whispered. "They're not dead. None of them are dead." The nurse dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucination. But the security footage from that night told a different story. At 2:17 a.m., two tall, thin silhouettes appeared briefly at the edge of the hospital's forest line. Their eyes glowed brightly in the infrared camera. They watched the hospital for several minutes before disappearing into the trees again. Tessa wasn't hallucinating. A month later, hikers discovered large, human-like footprints mixed with canine tracks deep in the forest. Hair samples found nearby were sent for analysis. The results were classified immediately. The local sheriff quietly told Claire during a private call, "We're not dealing with victims anymore. We're dealing with something smarter. Something organized."
She didn't disagree.
In late summer, a new report came in. A family near the valley claimed they heard voices outside their cabin, soft, distorted, calling a girl's name. When the father stepped outside with a flashlight, he saw nothing. But the next morning, he found claw marks on his back door and long strands of hair caught in the wood. Forest rangers began hearing howls that were not wolf, not coyote, and not human. Something in between. Claire returned to the ruined valley one last time before the area was fenced off permanently. Standing among the charred remains of the kennels, she heard rustling from the trees. A figure stood there, thin, pale, long-haired. It stared at her with intelligent eyes. A girl's eyes. Then it vanished. The truth settled in her chest like a cold weight. Crowell's pack was still alive, and they were adapting. Somewhere in the rural wilderness of the United States, 30 missing girls, no longer entirely human, were forming a new pack of their own. They were hiding, surviving, evolving, maybe waiting. And the worst part was that Claire wasn't sure whether they were a threat or a new beginning of something entirely unknown. The nightmare of the isolated dog breeding farm had not ended. It had just gone wild,